In this video, I'm doing a quick example of how to create a scatter plot. So I have just some made-up data here. I have some homework scores and some test scores. And we would create a scatter plot when we're trying to look at a correlation between two values. So one thing to pay attention to is you don't want a scatter plot unless the values you're looking at are paired. So in this example, the homework score 57 and the test score 65 belonged to the same imaginary student. So these are each paired in some way that makes sense. If your data isn't paired, it doesn't really make sense to make a scatter plot. So the first step in Excel is to just highlight both of your columns. You can include the titles or not, it's up to you. And then go to the Insert tab and choose in this center charts section the one that has little dots on it. This is the scatter plot. And typically you'll just use this first one, but there are some other options. And you can see that based on this data, the homework scores would be along the bottom axis, which I would probably want to add a title for. And the test scores are along the vertical axis. And we can see just from this graph that there's some correlation here. It seems that the higher homework score has higher test scores. So one thing we might want to do is just customize this graph a little bit, give it some labels. I can do that on the Design tab, either by choosing a quick layout that has labels on it already, or I can do an add chart element and add labels to the axes. So here's my labeled chart. Oftentimes the titles of these scatter plots will include sort of a versus, since you are comparing two data sets. One other thing you might want to look at if we're talking about correlation, whether you make a scatter plot or not, is the correlation coefficient. And I'm not going to explain the correlation coefficient in this video. This is just about the Excel process. To compute the correlation coefficient R in Excel, we use the function correl. So this is an equal sign and then C-O-R-R-E-L, short for correlation. And then open up some parentheses. You'll see that Excel tells us that we need array 1 and array 2. Typically array 1 is going to be your X values. So here I'm going to highlight the homework scores and then a comma and then my Y values. It doesn't actually matter whether you put the X or Y first. The correlation will be the same, but you want one data set, comma, the other data set. Then press enter, and here is my correlation coefficient. This sort of matches what we see in the graph, in that this data does seem to be pretty highly correlated. That's all I'm going to talk about in this video. In my next video, I'll go over how to get a regression equation or the line of best fit in Excel.